For a little background, this happened last year at work. I'm a woman and work in an office building, in a pretty typical job. One day, I was bored at work and didn't really have a whole lot to do. I got this random phone call, seemingly out of nowhere. Being bored, I decided to answer it. I didn't know who was calling me, as the number was not one that I had saved. Everybody who I typically talk to was already a contact in my phone. This included friends, family, work people, really everybody. So this was more than a little bit strange. When I answered the phone, some random guy on the other end said hi to me. I said hello back, and then there was this bit of silence. I asked the guy who he was. He just said he must have had the wrong number. I told him it was no problem. However, he did not hang up right away. Instead, he began asking me questions. He first asked who I was, and I told him my first name. I thought that would lead him to telling me who he was trying to call, but then he asked me where I was. I said I was at work. I didn't tell him where I worked or anything like that. He then asked if I lived in a particular city, the one that I did live in. I said yes, now a bit curious. I was wondering why he was asking me all these questions. I remember he asked me a couple of other things, but I interrupted him and said I was at work and couldn't really talk about this right now. The guy was starting to seem weird as well. He said okay, and then I hung up the phone. I went on with my job, and he didn't call back or anything. Probably within the next day or so, though, I got a random friend request from somebody on Facebook who I did not know. It was a guy who I had zero mutual friends with. I didn't accept, but I also didn't decline either. I wasn't sure if I maybe knew him somehow, so I decided the best bet was to just ignore it. The next night, I got a call again from the same number. Now, I was at home though, not at work. I was curious, so I decided to answer. When I did, it was the same guy. He told me he'd just sent me a friend request on Facebook. In the call, he was acting super friendly and nice, and told me to accept it. I went on Facebook and did so. I'm not sure exactly why. He started making chit-chat, but I cut things short, and said that I had to be going. After the call, I went ahead and went on the guy's Facebook page, and decided to take a look around. He seemed pretty weird the more I looked at it, and the more I looked, the more I did not like him. He just posted all this really weird stuff that seemed kind of creepy. He had all these selfies too, with wide, bulging eyes that he would post like 10 times a day. A few days went by without any contact from him, so I pretty much forgot all about him. That is, until he suddenly messaged me on Facebook one day. I didn't want to talk to him, so I deleted him and did not respond, but I'd forgotten to block his number. The next morning, I woke to a slew of threatening texts. He asked me why I deleted him, and even threatened to come to my job mentioning it by name. I texted back telling him to leave me alone, and blocked his number. I thought that would do the trick. A few days went by with nothing. Everything seemed fine, and I started to forget about the guy again. Then, one day, I was at work again like normal. The way my office is, I have a sort of cubicle in a much larger room. It's not quite a full one though, so I can see around the entire office really. I sit at a table with my computer, and there are people kind of all over in the large room. When I was working, I heard people starting to chatter over near the entrance from the hallway. I looked over and saw that guy there. I couldn't believe it. He'd actually come to my job. He didn't see me right away, as I was kind of in the back corner of the room, not out of sight exactly, but not obvious either. Immediately, I ducked down and hid underneath my desk. My coworker saw me do this and asked what was going on. Meanwhile, the guy was talking to Donald, I think, one of the guys that worked closer to the door. He was asking the guy who he was and what he was doing there. The guy said he was there to see someone in particular, but when questioned, refused to say who. He tried to walk farther in, and Donald tried to stop him. I motioned for my coworker to get down too. She hid underneath her desk, and I whispered the gist of the situation. The guy just barreled in, walking around the office looking for me. Donald was eventually able to force him out of the room. He then closed the door and locked it. The guy began banging on the door and asking for me. Donald had had it at that point and yelled that he was calling the cops right now. This finally got the man to leave. I came out and explained to my coworkers the crazy situation. Everyone was pretty confused, and we all agreed it was pretty insane of that guy to do this. Thankfully, the man did not return after that, or else we really would have had to get the police involved. I still just can't believe the guy actually showed up to my job. I'm not really sure how he even found out exactly where I worked anyway, or how he got my number in the first place. I had no idea who he was. I hope I never see him or hear from him again, though. I was hanging out in my living room just watching TV in my apartment one night. It was a relaxing evening until my phone started to ring. When I looked, I saw it was a number I didn't recognize, so of course I did not answer. A short time later, though, I got a notification that I had received a new voicemail. I thought it was odd how somebody that I didn't know had just called me and left a voicemail right away. Honestly, I figured it was one of those scam calls, but I decided to play the message anyway. I went on my phone and began to listen. A person in this kind of weird-sounding voice said, "Marcus, congratulations, call me back." My name is not Marcus, so I figured this person had the wrong number. I had no idea why somebody would be congratulating me or calling me Marcus, so I texted them, "I'm not Marcus, I think you may have the wrong number." Right after this, they called me again. I did not like the fact that they called me instead of texting me, but I decided to answer and clear the air. As soon as I said hello, the man with the weird voice said, "Hi, Marcus." The way the guy spoke was just so strange. It was not the way his voice sounded necessarily, but just his tone overall and his cadence. I stopped him and said, "I'm not Marcus, you have the wrong number." The person insisted I was, and kept saying, "Marcus, congratulations." I was so confused that honestly I was speechless. I literally said nothing. He said congratulations one more time, then hung up. At this point, I thought it had to now be a prank or something. Somebody was pulling a joke on me, clearly. Why this joke in particular, I had no idea. Who's Marcus? I had no clue. I also didn't know who would be doing this, because I didn't recognize the voice at all. I have all my friends' numbers saved. It didn't sound like a voice changer either, or one of those AI voices. There was too much emotion, and it sounded very human. A short time later, they called again, which I let go to voicemail. When I listened to it, I only got even more confused. "I'm calling you to say that you are Marcus, and I don't know why you keep denying it. Call me back when you have a chance. And by the way, congratulations." It was so weird, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't call the person back and didn't respond by text either. I had no clue what this could all be about. A few days went by and I received no more calls or texts from this person. I came home to my apartment one evening, though, to find an envelope taped to my front door. I picked it up, went inside, and opened it. There was a letter that at the start of it said, "Congratulations, Marcus." The letter went on to say a whole bunch of nothing, really. It was typed out in a basic font. There were a lot of big words that sounded really complicated, but in my mind, it pretty much added up to a whole lot of nothing. In the end, though, I noticed it said I had to pay them $10,000. For what? I had no idea. I ripped up the letter and threw it away immediately. Since then, I've not received any more letters or calls or anything, but the fact this person went directly to my apartment and knows where I live somehow really creeps me out. I'm hoping it was just a prank put on by a friend, but I don't think so. I don't know anyone who would do that, or why they would. It all just seems so random. A few years ago, I worked at a coffee shop. This was a place that I worked at for a couple of years, located in the city. We opened early, and for a stretch of time, I would be the first one to get there. I would arrive super early in what was the middle of the night still, to start doing the tasks to get ready to open. The coffee shop was fairly large. It had the main behind-the-counter area for making drinks that ran along one wall. At the front of the shop, there was a large room, with tables, chairs, some plants and bookshelves, things like that. Then we had the bathrooms at the end of that room, as well as a storage area. Behind that area was a sort of back room. Not a back room for employees only, mind you, but another room with tables and chairs and things for customers. The entire place was filled with tons of decorations, and the furniture choice was very interesting as well. There were all kinds of chairs and couches, different tables and things. Just an interesting place. One morning, I arrived at my usual time. It was still dark out, and I entered through the main doors. I left most of the lights off when I did the early tasks, so that people wouldn't think the place was open or something. When I was starting things, though, I was hearing some noises from the back room. It sounded like somebody else was there. I stopped what I was doing and listened in, but the noises immediately stopped as well. I continued, but about 10 minutes later I heard the noises coming from that same area once more. I'm not going to lie, I had not investigated before this because I was too creeped out. I hoped it was just my imagination or something like that, and tried to just ignore it. This time, when I heard it though, I stopped and listened in even more closely. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded like someone walking around or moving in the back room. This time I called out, speaking loudly and clearly, and asking if somebody was back there. When I did, it was just dead silence in response. I was really creeped out. My coworker wouldn't be there for almost another hour. I decided to check it out personally. First, I turned on the lights where I was, so it wouldn't seem as scary. Then I walked over to the back area and turned on the lights there as well. It was hard to see everything in the room because of all the decorations and furniture like I mentioned before, but I didn't see anyone there. Once more, I asked if anyone was in the room and got no response. There was a chance that whoever I'd heard was hiding or had gone into the storage room, but I wasn't going to be looking around. I went back over and continued with my work, hoping this would not be a bad situation. To that point, nothing bad had happened, and I didn't know for sure that somebody else was even in there. As I continued getting the place ready for opening, things were fine for a good 30 minutes or so. I was starting to feel a lot better, and was near the front of the place when I heard a door closing. This made me stop what I was doing again and listen. After that, it was silence, but that all but confirmed to me that somebody else was in there. Doors don't just close on their own. There was no fan on and no wind that would close it. I couldn't tell which door it was, but I didn't want to check either. I did my best to just ignore this and keep working. Soon, though, I heard more sounds, and all I wanted to do was leave. I turned on every light and texted my coworker. I still didn't see any signs of the person, but my coworker was already on her way and arrived just minutes later. When she got there, we both felt a little more brave and searched the entire shop together. It wasn't necessarily the most thorough search. We were just kind of glancing around every room, looking behind a few places, but still we found nothing. As soon as we were both at the front of the shop minutes later, though, we heard the back door suddenly open. It was a door that was locked from the outside, with a heavier door. For this door to open, somebody had to be inside. The door then closed. We did not see it from where we were, but it shocked us both. We walked over and saw the door now clearly shut. We looked out into the alleyway behind the shop, but nobody was there anymore. There was plenty of time for whoever it was to get away. After that, there were no more strange noises in the shop that morning. We opened a short time later anyway, and the day went by as normal. We never saw who was back there, and I still don't know who or why. I went to a large university for college that I really enjoyed. Of course, it was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun as well. I made quite a few friends and have many good memories from college. One memory in particular, though, is not so much fun but rather scary. It took place during my senior year. That year, I lived in an apartment with my roommate Jordan. I had known her since we were freshmen. We had this tiny little apartment that was a few blocks off campus, and we would normally just walk to our classes every day. Also, there was this coffee shop that was a few blocks away, in the other direction down another street. My roommate Jordan had told me about it, and we would go there to study and grab coffee sometimes, even when Jordan couldn't make it. I would go there to study quite often and do homework by myself. One afternoon, I went to the coffee shop like normal, with my laptop and a few school books in tow. I had gone there from our apartment and Jordan was gone, not sure where. The coffee shop was average-sized, I would say. There were a good number of tables and chairs around for people to sit and do work. When I got there, it wasn't very busy. I found a good table near a side wall. I was doing my work, and occasionally I would notice some of the same people at the coffee shop from time to time. I went there very often. As I was there on this day, I noticed a man sitting at a table sort of across from me. He took out his laptop and went on it, and I didn't really think anything of it at all. I remained at the coffee shop doing homework and studying for a good several more hours. Finally, at 7 p.m., it was dark outside, so I decided to leave. I got up and started packing up my things. As I was doing that, though, I observed that the man that was across from me also got up and started to pack his things as well. When I had my stuff together, I walked to the door and left, and the man followed out right after me. These particular doors led to a small parking lot on the side of the building. When I got out into the lot, I was going to cut through it and go on the sidewalk. However, just steps into my walk through the parking lot, I heard the man speak behind me. I stopped and looked back at him. He was walking behind me and asked if I needed a ride. I told him, "No thanks, I'm fine." It's kinda cold to be walking, a little bit chilly, don't you think? It was chilly, but I had a jacket and was fine. Then, the thought occurred to me. How did this guy know that I walked there? I was in the parking lot right now, so how did he know that none of these cars was mine? I walked away and began going down the sidewalk. The main road that the coffee shop was on would get busy during the day, but it was pretty quiet now. I had to walk along that for a short ways. Then I would cross over a few quieter streets and walk the last couple of blocks to our apartment. When I walked back, things went fine. However, I was on the quieter street nearing our apartment when I heard a car coming up behind me. I looked over. When I did, I saw the car. It drove past me, but it looked like the same guy from earlier was driving. Now, of course, I couldn't be sure because it was dark out, and he'd gone by in only a second. Could have been any man, but it certainly looked a lot like him. It went out of sight, and of course, I began to wonder if that was just a coincidence or not. I continued with my walk home and eventually made it. When I got back in, I soon enough forgot about the whole experience. It was probably 2 or 3 days later. I went back to the coffee shop. It was a little bit earlier in the day this time because of my class schedule. When I got there, I sat down and began doing my homework and studying. Not long after, though, I noticed that same man walking in. Prior to the previous time, I had never seen that man at the coffee shop before. He just kinda gave me a bad feeling. I didn't look at him, though, and just focused on doing my own thing. The guy sat down in the same spot as before, facing me a ways away. Over the next couple of hours, I just focused in on my work. Eventually, I decided to leave, much earlier this time. I wasn't there as long as I'd been the previous time. When I got up to go, once more though, the man picked up his stuff right after. I left and he followed out behind me, almost identical to the previous time. This was really creeping me out now. When I was walking out, the man once more asked me if I needed a ride. I said no thank you, and he asked if I was sure, this time adding that it was a long walk to get home. That got my attention immediately. I stopped and turned around. I asked the man if he lived in my apartment building or something. I thought that could be an explanation, although I'd never seen him before in or around the building. Maybe he'd seen me and that's how he knew me, but he said no. I asked him how he knew I walked to the coffee shop and how he knew how far away I lived. He paused for a moment before saying he was familiar with one of my friends. When I asked him who, he seemed obviously nervous and blurted out the name Emily. I didn't have any friends named Emily. I knew he was lying. I turned around and began to move away. The guy went to his car. I walked back home, taking a different, longer route, and did not notice the guy following me. After that, I stopped going to that coffee shop as well. For the next couple of weeks, I was honestly paranoid the guy was stalking me or something. Thankfully, after that, I stopped seeing him. I still think the guy was up to no good, though. I grew up in a big and tight-knit country family. We would always get together for just about everything. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, you name it, really. We spent all of the holiday at my grandparents' house, and it was always really fun. We also lived right in the middle of Tornado Alley. Most of our houses had storm cellars, including my grandparents' house. They always kept theirs locked, though, and we had never seen it open before. I always thought that was a little bit weird. If a tornado was on its way, you didn't want to have to spend the time undoing a padlock rather than getting into the cellar right away. The few seconds between taking the lock off and getting down the steps could be the answer between life and death. I only remember one time in my life that any of us kids tried to get into the shelter. You know how boys can be. Whenever we see something we can get into, we'll try to, even if it might get us into some trouble. So, my older cousin and I tried to find a way to break off the lock and get inside. I don't recall my grandmother ever getting mad at me in my entire life. However, she must have seen us from the kitchen window and came outside immediately. She was yelling, screaming, saying to get away from there. She brought us into the house and made us stand in the corner. I wasn't really sure why. We were never told to not try and get into the shelter or anything, but we were punished as if we had been. After that, we never tried to do it again. The years passed, and eventually I forgot about this. I didn't really think of it again until both of my parents ended up passing away. They had inherited the house from my grandparents, and then I had inherited the house from them. It was only when I was at the house, which had been rented by various people throughout the years, that I remembered the storm cellar. When I came across it, looking through the backyard, it brought back a lot of memories. Most of all, that one day that my cousin and I got in so much trouble for trying to get inside. If it hadn't been for that one time we'd gotten in so much trouble, I wouldn't have even given it a second thought. But it made me decide that I was really curious as to why she'd gotten so angry. As an adult, I was sure it was simply because if we had gotten hurt down there, we'd never heard the end of it. Well, I wasn't able to find a key to the lock. I went through every key and looked through all the boxes I inherited, but I couldn't find anything. I even checked my parents' house, which I'd also inherited. There was nothing. Finally, I went out and bought a pair of bolt cutters. The lock was pretty thick, so I had to get a big pair. Even then, it took a lot of effort just to break through the lock. When I finally did, the snapping sound was very satisfying. Going down into the cellar, I saw a lot of things that didn't make sense for a storm shelter. It looked like someone had been living down there. There was an old bed that still had some sheets and blankets on it, obviously from a very long time ago. There were dates written on the walls of the really small room as well. There was a table, there were papers on it. They were old and decaying, but most of them were drawings that looked like they'd been made in crayon. Even though they were so old, there were some names written on many of them. That name was Dylan. Thinking about this, at first I didn't remember. but eventually it started to come back to me. There was someone named Dylan that I remembered from when I was a kid. He lived with my grandparents even though he was old enough to have lived on his own. I recalled him when I was very, very young, but one day suddenly he was gone. Looking at the dates on the wall, the earliest ones I found were from when I was about 7 years old. The last ones I could find were decades after that. It got me thinking, and I started to do a little research. I came to a horrifying realization. I had an uncle named Dylan who was younger than my father. He was mentally ill and eventually passed away all alone in an insane asylum, but he had only been placed there after my grandparents had died. Until that point, there was no record of him from the time I recalled him until then. It didn't take much to put two and two together and realize why my grandmother had been so angry at us that day when we were fooling around with the door to the cellar. Dylan had been locked down there, hidden away from the world. She didn't want us to find out about him. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. Before we do anything else, we have to thank our Patreons who support at the credits tier. So thank you to Grace Demarest, Caitlin, Amy Jensen, Deborah Alexander, Stephen Dahlberg, Gaddy Family, Jessica GB, Todd Benzales, Lord Rupert Everton, Dirty D, and Brielle Shin. Thank you guys so much for choosing to support the channel, and thank you for every other patron that supports the channel as well. I couldn't continue to do this without your guys' help. If you guys enjoyed the stories in this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. And if you have any stories of your own that you'd like to share for me to read, please be sure to check in the description of the video, where you'll find a link to my social media, mainly my Gmail. Go ahead and send me a message there, and I'll try to read your story as soon as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great